Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are all meeting in virtual form. Today is Tuesday, May 28th at 5:30 p.m. And I guess we can start the policy and curriculum committee meeting.
Great. Okay. I think that's Member Ali, is that you?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Okay, very good. Good to see you. Great. Well, it's good to have everybody together here. We have a big agenda tonight, so we'll jump right in, hopefully with a couple of sets of policies that are themed together a little bit. But first, because I'm going to put my screen up here, just want to thank Courtney Graffius, our technology integration coordinator, who's joining us tonight and has been doing a ton of work on thinking about in particular, generative AI and where we stand in relationship to that, and I'm excited to kind of bring forward the proposed policy revisions tonight around that. So we'll jump in. And then thanks, Tyler, for joining us. Tyler Schwaller, our Student Equity Officer, who's helping us make our way through the Title IX revisions. So let me get started here with my little presentation. Sorry, no. All right. There we go. All right. So our hope tonight is to kind of approve revisions to a set of technology-related policies. So we'll go through them. There's 3 policies, a couple of them with related procedures that we'll talk about. And the goal has been to kind of have those in the queue so that we can have any updates ready for the coming school year. And then the second, and we'll talk more about this when we get there, is initial revisions to our harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment policies based on the federal language and updates to Title IX. And there's an implementation expectation by August 1. So that was why we had to kind of move this up on the agenda. So we'll do our usual routine where I'll do a little bit of overview of some of the background and, speak to some of the changes that are in the slides, or I'm sorry, in the policies, and then open it up for kind of questions and discussion, and we can look at the actual kind of red line changes if necessary during that time. And Courtney, for the technology policies will kind of weigh in and, field questions and share her perspective. And then similarly, when we get to the Title IX piece in our harassment and sexual harassment policies, Tyler will do the same. So without further ado, for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first policy. So this is JICD, the Academic Honesty Policy. And this one really we wanted to bring forward because of the work that has been going on, both within our district that Courtney's been leading in partnership, in particular with many of our school librarians and others across the district around generative AI, but then how that also aligns to our expectations around student and employee internet use. So just some quick background, and then I'll invite Courtney to add anything I've forgotten or gotten wrong. By we, I mean Courtney's been kind of convening a work group of staff and students to consider how we want to, approach the use of generative AI tools in Portland Public Schools. So there's really a wide range of how districts are approaching this, and it spans the spectrum from not doing anything, right, and waiting to see where the work goes and the field goes, to banning it completely, to, kind of not having any, to having some other kind of measured place. And so I think we've landed, our take is we've landed on taking kind of an approach where we're teaching responsible use, similar to other technologies, as we know over the past few years and past decades, that have moved forward. They're ultimately ubiquitous, and our role as educators is to help build responsible use. So digital citizenship is really extending into kind of that field. So that's what you see in terms of the approach of the policy, as well as from a curriculum perspective. So we initiated trainings in with leadership and staff this year to build their knowledge about generative AI, to be able to help kind of manage and support students in that way. So then just in the context of academic honesty, and it's, located in part in this policy because it really often comes up with questions about, whose work is this, right? Or that can be a question. So we wanted to make sure we had it landed here. So we added just a little bit of framing language in the opening paragraph. So in terms of the red line updates in the policy, there's just a little bit of framing language in the beginning before it gets to kind of the, consequences of a lack of academic honesty that just connects to some of our kind of core values in our broader instructional vision. And then, as you can see in the red lines, we incorporated a specific element, and then in a few other places, language around the use of generative AI. So those are kind of the changes and a little bit of the background as it relates to the academic honesty policy. Courtney, is there anything you'd want to share before we, I see your hand, Mickey, just let me see if, Courtney, you want to share anything before we, sorry.
I think the only thing that I would share, in addition to what you said, or to kind of flesh out a little bit the teaching responsible use of generative AI, is that we would like to teach it to all of our students to provide equitable learning opportunities and access, as opposed to students, some students who may have the good fortune to learn it at home from a family member who is adept at it, and then other students who may not have that opportunity. So it seems like having us teach it to all of our students helps to level the playing field, so that any advantages that come to one student could come to all of our students. So that's just one little piece I wanted to add.
Thanks, Courtney. Mickey, welcome. Good evening. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. So while I was reading the policy, I just want to get a little detail on the generative AI, having kind of the linguistic inputs, what we mean about it, because I know we're going to have some work group, working to try to define that generative AI. So can you just get a little bit of information about the linguistic input then you have there, for me to understand what everything's going to align with? Because, yeah.
I'm going to have
the meaning in the concept right here, yes.
So what we mean by generative AI here might be something like, in the wider population, folks have heard of ChatGPT. ChatGPT has guidelines in such that students, or it needs to be used by students, people older than 18. And so, and there are some privacy concerns related to that one in particular, but that is one that's widely known. Some other ones that I can share an example is Canva, and that might be used for creating something. So you might input a prompt into the application Canva and ask for it to brainstorm a list of reasons for a certain war or something like that. So that's just an example. And so then what the generative AI does is it quickly generates text. And in addition to text, there are other uses like with illustration and also with music. So those are a couple of examples of generative AI.
Oh, okay. All right. So, yeah. I will do more research to get a little more some other details if I need to. So thank you so much for the basic information. So when I see then we're going to convene some other work groups. So do we have any time frame, or is something that we are projecting, or something in process to?
Yeah, it's Courtney, would you give a little bit of the backstory on the work group? It's already been in process. Yeah, It's happening.
Yeah, so we brought the group together in April of 2023. I remember in November and December of 2022 when ChatGPT took the world kind of by storm, and I remember that well because that is the area that my focus is in, is technology. And so come January of 2022, 2023, when we were back to school, there were high school teachers asking lots of questions, having lots of concerns about plagiarism and cheating, and asking where the district stands. And so we convened that group in April and have been doing lots of reading, listening to podcasts, talking, and then we added students in January of this year, and their take on it is that they feel like they're going into a world that is going to be full of AI, and they want to be prepared for how to navigate that world.
Okay. So just the last one, the policies apply to the middle school and high school, right? Or is all grades?
Well, I mean, the policy applies to all grades.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Julianne, Member Opperman?
Thank you. Courtney, I think it's a great idea that we teach it to everyone, because I think, if you know it, that's useful whether you use it or not. My question is, how about teachers? It's harder to get the teachers to, the adult learners to try new things, or to at least be knowledgeable enough to recognize it. And so I was wondering what you were planning as far as that goes, PD-wise, or who's doing the teaching. And then the other question I have is, in written work, you can easily go on, take a line and check to see on Google to see whether it's plagiarized or not, where it comes from. How do you recognize AI? And how is that going to be helpful to the teachers to figuring out if people are or are not able to meet this policy's demands?
Yeah, those are some great questions. So at all of the high schools, we've done an initial AI basics training. There are teachers who are super gung-ho to try it out and to use it, and there are those who are much more reticent. And so we have a wide range of people who have tried different things with it. And so we've done an initial training, and then from time to time, we will put out some information for folks that they can do some reading or listening to podcasts. By the end of the school year, we'll have an asynchronous module for teachers called AI Basics, which really kind of repeats the training that high school teachers have had thus far. And I will say we're kind of working our way down through middle school. And so that's where we've been with PD in when we go back to school. Part of our August Institute will be for myself, Karen Scheibels, who's our mobile makerspace teacher, but also has a great deal of knowledge about this topic. And our librarian at each of our high schools will collaborate to present professional development, where we're sharing a unit that we've developed on an introduction of AI and using AI responsibly with students. So those are some of the pieces that we have in the works. And as far as plagiarism goes, there are a number of ways that you can do it. One of the ways that I think is a great one is to become familiar yourself with what generated AI generated text looks like by practicing and practicing with it yourself. And then another way is to have students do on-demand writing so that you know what their writing style is, and can kind of do some comparisons. And then there are AI checkers, which aren't all accurate, but that's another piece that's out there. So those are just a couple of the things that pieces that are in the works for being able to share with teachers related to checking for plagiarism.
Great. If teachers wanted to, or anybody wanted to know more about AI, say a parent wanted to know how to use or do or understand AI, can you provide suggestions for, well, you're talking podcasts, or are there any kind of coursework that they can access on their own in any language? That would be an interesting and useful thing, I think, for parents, because I think that often is an issue with understanding what's going on. So I guess it can be very creative, and I think probably, I don't know if Tim thinks so, but in middle school, it will take off. That's the crowd that will get this and get it done well. So good luck with it. Thank you.
Member Ali?
I just had a clarifying question. Will students have clear communication as to the guidelines of like using AI and what constitutes as plagiarism? And like sometimes mistake can happen, but I'm just wondering how clear and what kind of information students are getting at the beginning of the school year to make sure that this, if we see this in your work, then it's considered plagiarism, and here are the consequences.
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the unit that we'll be sharing at the beginning of the year includes guidelines for using AI with integrity for students. And so it's kind of a scale from like a 1 to a 6 where there's no AI used, and then to the 6 where there's lots of AI used, along with examples. So that's something that the work group has come up with, is that are those guidelines, and that will be part of the professional development to explain to teachers how that works, and that they'll need to be including that as part of their syllabus so that they can help students to understand and then be clear at the beginning of an assignment what can and what cannot be used. And then I've seen the handbooks at the high schools, and they take this academic honesty policy and they break it down a little bit more for students, and they reference this board policy, and it includes what the what plagiarism is and what the consequences are.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Right. Tim, any
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask one question.
Yep.
And also, I'm wondering if we can put a friendly amendment to specify what generative AI means, because I'm assuming other people are going to have the same question that Mickey had earlier. And then Courtney, I had a question for you about, I think you said good AI. I think I might have heard you say that. Is there any way that you guys can maybe do some work in differentiating like good AI from, I guess, bad AI, or good usage of AI versus bad usage of AI? I feel like that would like get through the confusion, because obviously like ChatGPT is probably not something we would want our students using. But, you know, Canva obviously is something that students would use, right? For like flyers or like for other things. And so I'm wondering if maybe you guys can like do some of that work of specifying like what is good AI and what, you know, you shouldn't be using versus like what is good to use and that would help support your work versus like what is along the lines of plagiarism, or what is along the lines of like, getting more support than you need from generative AI. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that the PPS guidelines that we have created for students to help them understand where they can fall on that scale, that 1 through 6 scale, in an assignment based on what the learning targets. I think that'll help define for students what where they can be. And then, as far as the good generative AI, the pieces that I think about related to that are data privacy, and so. Yeah, so part of my work is to ensure that we have a data privacy agreement signed before we use applications, and there's a software catalog that includes that, and so we will be sure to highlight what the generative AI tools are that can be used.
Okay, thank you.
And yes, on the friendly amendment, we'll find somewhere to add, as we often do, something that explains the term generative AI, like a definition in there somewhere. We struck out, just to name it, like such as ChatGPT and other similar services, in part because of what you're hearing from Courtney, right? Just that's not necessarily what we want to direct people for, and the field's so evolving, didn't feel like it made sense to call out specific things here, more broadly. Yeah. The field, and so we'll add that definition.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, there's a lot of generative AI things that you could use. So,
Member Opperman?
Right. Just a follow-up question: in what classes or what way are all the students in high school going to learn this? I mean, are you taking over the English department or the science department, or this, that can be, and is there some way that there's going to be ongoing help if there's a project coming up with teachers? What's the follow-up beyond your basic, this is it?
So I'm in talks with the secondary director of academics regarding where this will fall for each high school, and the places that it is looking to fall, like it will fall, is in advisory, and so that will be good, because then all of the teachers will have the experience of teaching what the expectations are. And then, as far as additional support beyond the initial overview beyond the intro unit, our librarians have been part of this generative AI work group, and so they're well poised to be able to support teachers moving forward.
Right. Tim, I was just going to see if you've, just from the middle school classroom experience, anything you just wanted to share or offer just from your experience with kids around this over the past couple of years?
Sure. I am happy that we're taking this this perspective, and like with cautious embrace, and a plan to educate students and educate teachers. I have friends at other school districts outside of Southern Maine who are in places where it's just forbidden, like it's just the websites are blocked and they're just not going to engage with it at all. But as we know, like students always find a way to meet their needs, and sometimes their needs are like get help in other ways. And so I'm happy we're going to teach them. Like I've been embracing it with a couple of other colleagues at King, wholeheartedly since the beginning, and it's been awesome to see how it can help. Throwing in like with a kid, throwing in their work into one of these programs and giving it a specific prompt, not like fix my writing, but like identify all of the spelling mistakes that I have, but don't tell me where they are. Just say the number of them. And then it's like a scavenger hunt of, find the 13 words that are misspelled in their writing or something like that. Saves teachers a lot of time, and it's doing what we would be doing, and helping kids identify mistakes and improve their writing. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. All right. And yeah, we've heard, and I mean, just last thing on this, and then maybe we can move, just knowing we have a full agenda. Now, and maybe in a moment, I can turn it back to you for a motion and with the friendly amendment. But yeah, I don't know if you anything else you'd want to say, Courtney or Tim, from with your colleagues, just around teachers' use of it. I mean, I know in particular, one of your former colleagues from King, Bobby, I know has been in particular one of our row teachers about how he's been using it and the asset it's been for as a teacher to support lesson planning and things like that. So a number of potential benefits for kids and adults if we can, as we learn how to use them. All right. If there aren't any more questions about JICD, Nyla, maybe I'll turn it over to you for facilitate a vote. So the goal, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, oh my goodness, it's a motion. Can I get a motion to approve policy JICD with the friendly amendment, even though we don't have it? Okay, can I get a motion? Thank you, Yusra. Can I have a second? Thank you, Julianne. And then all hands if you approve this policy. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good, Aaron.
Great. Maybe we'll repeat that cadence.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No. Just we'll do next up is going to be the student internet use and long title. Sorry, I don't remember it all. Student use of school computers and internet. But let's look at both the policy and the procedure here together, and then we'll kind of approve those. I don't think we don't need to do those separate. And then one thing I forgot to say at the beginning, and appreciate Member Opperman for our back and forth on this, but we had some other folks, not our typical policy reviewers from Drummond reviewing some of these, some folks that have a little more technology background. So you may have noticed in a few places the references to the Board of Education or the committee got jumbled. Typically, we've been moving to have all of our policies indicate the board as opposed to the school committee as the formal proper name. That's been fine. In this case, the legal reviewer reverted some of those changes back to committee. So it's a little bit of a mishmash, and we're going to clean all that up for the final version so that it all says board uniformly. So anyway, I think that starts to come up in these policies. So just wanted to flag that we'll make sure they all say board. Okay, so student use of school-issued computers and the internet. So just a little bit of background that we think folks are probably familiar with, but just to make sure we're on the same page, all secondary students are assigned a one-to-one Chromebook device, which they can take home. They must complete the PPS computer use agreement to do so. An example of that was kind of attached in board docs as just an artifact to see what that looks like. At the elementary school level, we don't have students take devices home, so they're provided devices for in-school use. And there's a different version of kind of the computer use agreement that's specific to elementary that they must utilize. So all of that's in service of ensuring, in addition to kind of the handbooks and in other places, that we've proactively are making sure people are aware of kind of both what they're responsible for, as well as kind of the expectations in terms of use. And particularly as you see in the policy and procedure and everything, this real clarity, hopefully, even though sometimes it's surprising to both students and adults, that these are school-issued computers and there isn't really any expectation of privacy as it relates to the computer and or your email account or any of those things. So those are things that we do to help make sure people are aware of kind of the expectations. Here, again, just kind of consistent with this overall theme of kind of the technology related policies. There aren't a ton of policy updates or procedure updates. We included the reference to the student cell phone policy that we updated, about 18 months ago, and then added language both about generative AI as well as, some of the third party, expectations of following third party terms. So these are some of the applications that, Courtney was referencing that is part of our approved software catalog and things like that, just to make sure that people know and understand that the responsibilities apply beyond just the use of the computer and the internet, but other, devices or programs that we've approved. So those are the main kind of changes, proposed changes. Want to just bring it into alignment and update as a result of all that. So Courtney, anything else you'd want to add?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks.
Right. So I'll call up the policy. We can start there. And then the procedure. Here we go. So were there any questions about the policy or any of the language there? Go ahead, Member Bondo.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know which one is. I think it's on the policy. I think, yes. I just try to understand how do we control the off-school property? Yes, is on the right. I think it's here.
Oh, the no right to privacy. Yeah.
Yes. So how do we control the off-school property? Because they are bringing home, and then when they're at school, we can control. But when they're bringing the computer out of school, or for the property, so how do we control those devices? Or we have a way to control them, or no?
Yeah.
Because I've been seeing my kids when they're at school, they've been bringing the computer at home. So whatever they're using at home, the school doesn't have any control of that. So I just wonder how we do for the school.
Well, I know for certain one piece, and then Courtney, I don't know if you know, but just in terms of like the notion of kind of the internet services and like all of the email accounts and all of those kinds of things, those things are not location specific. So they, the way that the computers are administered, IT maintains a record of all activity, regardless of where it happens. In regards to like search histories, emails sent, chats. Really anything kind of that happens there, the kind of permissions such for kids it's kind of tracking all that data. So we can go back and search and we're like, did kids ever use a search term of whatever, right? If there's an issue and we're trying to kind of find that history. So the kind of data associated with an individual student's account is kind of accessible and is always tracking regardless of location. I'm not as exactly sure, and I know it's changed a little bit with our move from MacBooks to Chromebooks about the filtering software. And how that or what happens with that outside of the PPS network. Courtney, are you familiar?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so if there are like trigger words that a student is searching for because they're signed in with their Chromebook, and we use securely for web filtering, the assistant principal at a school would get an automatic notification of those words. And they don't always come at the most reasonable hours either. So I definitely have heard that has happened before.
Okay.
And so securely, the filtering functionality happens regardless of whether it's on PPS network or non-PPS network, because that was the change we made during COVID, because this obviously was a paramount concern at that time. I remember it was like extending some of the securely filtering beyond just the network.
Yeah, I believe it does, but I'm not 100% sure. So we could check on that and then loop back.
Okay. Right, sure. And my second question is that I know on the elementary school, parents have to complete the form, the computer agreement. So what happened to the middle school and high school, because I remember when my kids were in middle school and high school, I never had to complete anything. They just brought a computer. So I'm just wonder if we have something that the parents are aware about any agreement, user agreement, anything, or we just, so those are sending to parents through the kids, through the students, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, so that means, yeah, okay. I used that one just once when my son messed up the computer. That's why he showed me the paper. But before that, so I just wonder how many parents never see these kind of, form and everything else.
So, I mean, it should be all of them, to have had this, kind of laptop agreement, kind of on file. It may be some, that the practice was, because at high school, the practice generally is students are issued a device in 9th grade, and unless there's an issue, they keep it. They don't return it at the beginning of the, at the end of the year and get a new one at the beginning of the year. So it may have just been a one-time, kind of process. But in the middle school, they, don't keep them over the summer. So they pick them up and kind of turn them in from, school year to school year. So there's a little more turnover of, kind of the permissions and so forth.
Okay. So just want to make sure. So the beginning of the school, parents has to sign this form, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
In 9th grade.
9th grade, yes.
Every year.
My understanding is when it's issued in 9th grade. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Or if a new one needs to be issued or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Aaron, did you say that the students are keeping their laptops all year now?
At the high school.
At the high school? Okay, so in the summer they keep them?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Member Opperman?
Thank you. There's part of the permission agreement setup involves using their own device. And I'm wondering how that fits in with telephones or, the phone, because those are computers. And the permission to use your own device be given, by a parent or a teacher or the like. So, I mean, if a student is in a history class and they have their phone out, and maybe their backpack's in their bag or somewhere else, they could take the phone out and go on the internet. So my question is, how does the device piece work with the computer in the phone?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, and that was one of the things we added is having the additional policy where there's a whole separate policy that treats kind of the expectations of personal owned devices, which is primarily cell phones. So we have, that's policy JFCK and the related procedure that we've updated that spells out all those expectations related to that.
But they don't need to have a note from the parent on that or the teacher on that. So it's just, it to me is kind of a bit of a confusion, or maybe not necessarily, but how big does a telephone have to be a device? So it's.
Well, I think we're not thinking about it so much in that regard. It's just like whose is it? Right? Is it theirs or is it ours? Whether it's a teeny tiny cell phone or, a large desktop computer. And so that's the distinction that's being made is like who owns the device. Thus what governs what they're able to do with it. And so, we have some specific restrictions around what they can do with their personal devices within the context of at school, right? And that's what's enumerated in the JFCK, right? The expectations. And that big update was essentially that we moved through last year in the wintertime, was that for middle school students, they should not have their cell phones out between the start of school and the end of school, right? And so, your question at high school still kind of lives there a little bit, but it narrows it somewhat. But that's where those expectations are laid out.
Yeah, and I think it's also stating to the fact that a student can bring their own laptop in and just use their own laptop with like their own hotspot or something like that, and it wouldn't be restricted by the network. And so they would be able to do as they please. And so the reason why that's needed is because they're not going to just go use their own laptop to go through the schooling, where they can then go on any website that they want to. I don't know if that makes more or gives more clarity. But Yusra, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Well, it was cleared up with the restrictions, even with personal devices. And I think also you can access like, I think TikTok or something like that when you're at school.
Yeah. There's some social media and stuff that's, filtered out. That's what the securely that Courtney mentioned is kind of the content filter that's applied across our networks and our own devices that limits your ability to access various things. Okay, let me just switch just to C. So there, again, like I said, so here's an example. We'll switch this back to board. He was driving me nuts with changing that up on me. Were there any other questions just related to the procedure or anything around the student-facing use? And then we...
I don't think there's any.
Okay, so again, here, in 5, this is where we included that language around generative AI to kind of complete that, make that consistent across the body of policies, and then the third-party service providers. So, okay, if there aren't any other questions on this one, I'll stop the share for a moment and we can move towards committee action.
Sorry, Aaron, can you so we just went through.
This is IJNDB. Yep.
And then did we do R as well?
Yeah, we looked at both of those. Yep.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve policy IJNDB and IJNDB-R? Thank you, Mickey. Can I have a second? Thank you, Yusra. All in favor? Thank you. And both of those policies passed on to the full board.
Right. Okay. All right. We're moving along pretty good. Maybe we won't need the extra time. All right. So the last of the kind of, package of technology related policies that we wanted to update, and we had done some work on the student use one during the pandemic, adding the Google platform stuff, but the employee one had not been updated in some time, as you'll see. So that was part of the reason it made the list here in terms of updates, but we'll go to that one here. Okay, so now the employee use of school-issued computers and devices. So a little bit of background on just how we operationalize this policy. So all employees, when they, are onboarded in the district, either, we have a big laptop distribution at the annual new staff orientation session. So all employees who are, getting a device as it relates to their position, that's one of the primary ways employees receive it. They have their own employee use agreement that needs to be signed at that time, or subsequently that happens at the site if, they aren't able to make the session there, the new employee session in August. As part of the summer orientation, educators are given an overview of the kind of software catalog to know what's been established, what fits under the student data privacy agreement, and big shout out to Courtney for that body of work since she's been with us. It was a bit of Wild West as we went into the pandemic, certainly started to get organized around that, and have been working diligently, led by Courtney, to ensure, we're doing everything we should be doing to protect student data privacy and only having those kinds of apps. So, well, it used to be a kind of wide range. Teachers were using whatever. And so that exposed kids potentially to, kind of potential, identity issues and so forth. So we really cleaned that up. And so educators get an orientation orientation to that at the new employee orientation. Just in terms of the actual policy and its related procedure, some similar language additions that you've seen in the student one, the third-party services, similar to as we added in the student one. Here, we hadn't, this reflects not having updated this in a while, but we added the additional language regarding our filtering technology. Again, that's securely. We updated just because technology's changed throughout the times since this was last updated. So kind of the range of devices and technology that we're using now, and then some of the other kind of related digital age issues to the prohibited uses in that space. So, Courtney, anything else you'd want to add on this part?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks.
Great. Ooh, sorry. Let me go back to... Okay. So let's start with the policy. And if it's easier, we can just jump back and forth. Essentially, they're related. So go ahead, Member Ali.
Can you scroll down to number 4? I think or is this the same one? Nope. I think I'm talking about the other. No, it's right here. No, it's right here.
Yep.
So where it says public schools reserves the right to monitor all computer devices, network, and internet. When you say all computers and devices, these are just school provided ones, not personal ones.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think other people might think the same way? I just was like, oh, all of my devices?
Right. Yeah. We can add just consistent with the opening sentence. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Member Ali. That was helpful. Chair Lenz, welcome. Good evening. Yep.
Sorry. And apologies for getting here late tonight. 2 questions. One, I wasn't sure if there was anything around employee use of AI that is maybe not in this policy or suggested change now, but just like something that might be coming up. Like to me, AI feels like a pretty like new frontier for us. So just thinking about like what potential things we may need to think about for the future. And then I don't know why we're capitalizing internet. I think we could not capitalize internet. That's super small, but just saying that out loud.
Yeah, I'll check MLA on the internet thing. Yeah, I don't know. Courtney, any thoughts on just the educator kind of as we're looking at employee use? Yeah, just not necessarily policy or procedure responses now, but.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective to add generative AI related to staff. And the thing that I can think of that would be really important would be to the first thing would be to ensure data privacy for students is protected. So that's kind of my first reaction to that, but I think that that's a really interesting idea.
Other questions about either the policy or the procedure? So from Member Ali, we'll add a little clarifying language there to ensure it's talking about monitoring PPS devices, and the PPS networks there to that second sentence. And then we'll work on the internet piece. It does feel antiquated for sure.
Erin, can you explain a bit about how I think it said that certain teachers will have like restrictions based on their positions. What is the level of restriction in that case? Like, could it still, you don't have to say the level of restriction, but could it still be that like teachers can't go on TikTok? Or like, would they have access to some of those things just because they have less restrictions?
I am wondering, I'm just thinking about where that language is just to make sure I speak about it correctly. I wonder if it's in the procedures. Maybe let me just double check. I mean, I don't think it was referring, I'll see if I can find it here. referring to like restrictions in that way, but I believe it may have been, in regards to like with Infinite Campus, you have different levels of restrictions in terms of both what data you can see and what you can do, right? Guidance counselors have a different level of, than teachers or ed techs that might just be able to check it, for just kind of reference information on a student or something like that. Teachers obviously have access to the grade book. So that's just an example of the differing permissions there. I think.
Oh, okay. So it's not talking necessarily about like their internet restriction.
No.
But the network will have restrictions anyways, right? Like a teacher can't just like go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Just so folks know, like this new piece is just a cleaned up version of the language that had been 6, just in an effort to make it more clear about staff use of email in particular, message groups. Okay. Any other questions about GCSA, either the policy or the procedure, or discussion about these? Yep, Member Bonda?
Oh, yes. I have some other, on the compensation, I think it's all the way down. If you scroll a little bit down, do the teachers, they have the same kind of, if a loss of the computer or device, do they have, because it's not really clear on that, yes.
Yeah, in terms of like if something happens to their computer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's only essentially the district assumes loss unless there's, some kind of negligent, behavior, right? So let me see where that is all. Is it in the policy?
Yes, he was in the concept.
So if a teacher loses the computer, then the district has to pay for it. But with students, they're responsible.
Yeah, that's what I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, generally no, if it's like loss or theft, if it's, that they've broken it, right? If it's something that they've done, in either case, that would be staff or student. I think that the expectations, I would say, are generally similar. There's not a higher level of, kind of expectation on students and families and we utilize kind of like an insurance program to help, there's some assumed amount of loss just from the number of devices we go through on the student side, that, covers, the vast majority of any issues with student computers. Sorry, I'm kind of scrolling here.
Aaron, I just want to stop a little bit there. So, we're making parents signing the form at the beginning of the year with all the different costs in cases we have a damage. But what you're saying then, then even though we have that form filled, if anything happened, they may have some waiver. I just want to understand, because if something is not really clear in my mind, why we have a different approach for the damage and costs for the student and for the teacher or staff there. We don't have any. Do they sign any form with a different cost of damage, or they don't?
Yeah, there's a form that they sign as well, saying that, if they, and I'm sorry, I can't find the language here off the top of my head while I'm trying to talk, but no, staff has to sign a form also, right, and kind of, acknowledge, they're taking responsibility for the district issued computer. I think on the student side, the insurance really covers a lot of the kinds of things that just break, right? And it's not because a student is doing anything wrong necessarily or anything like that, but just so that when it's in their possession, right, and something goes wrong, if there is a situation where, we're able to determine clearly that a student, intentionally broke a computer, smacked it on the desk when they were upset or whatever, right? That's where that language in terms of cost comes into play, is that we can engage that, right? If they've taken those steps, but like I said, that is very few and far between. I'm not familiar with an instance of it off the top of my head, but that the insurance coverage covers families for lots of the incidental things that happen in the Chromebooks. It is one of the challenges with Chromebooks in terms of some durability issues, that we're able to have some of those costs recouped through the insurance providers and not have families bearing those costs, if a charger gets lost or this or that or the other.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'll stop the share here for a moment, see if there's any, if there are any further questions on the employee use one. I think the two amendments I heard on that were the clarifying language in, what was that, section 4 about the right to privacy, making sure it's clear that it's all PPS computers, and then, looking at the formatting for, similar kind of formatting of the internet. So a few of the committee versus board things that'll get cleaned up here. So I'll make sure that's all ready to go. But I think otherwise, Nyla, if you want to take us through approval.
Thank you. Okay, let me just get the policies here. Okay. My gosh, wow, I always forget this. Motion to, wow. Sarah, I might need your help on this.
A motion to approve.
To approve. Wow. I'm so sorry. It's like
It's okay.
later.
I know it's a different part of your brain. You don't talk like this in the real world.
I really don't. Like, it's so hard for me to get in that space. Can I have a motion to approve policy GCSA and GCSA-R? Can I have a second? All in favor? And perfect. Approved and sent to the board with the friendly amendments.
Great. All right. So thank you, Courtney. You are more than welcome to hang out with us. It's, as you can see, a wonderful crowd. And shout out to Claire for always being here too. But you can also log off at this point, and we'll see you at the board workshop for this next week. So
Thanks so much, everyone.
bye, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Have a good night.
Sure.
All right. So excited to kind of bring forward proposed revisions to our student and staff harassment and sexual harassment and discrimination policies. Obvious, as you know, we did substantial work on the student policy in kind of 2019, 2020 through the pandemic for a deep substantive revision there. One of the issues we grappled with at the time was we had the Title IX regulations that had been issued by relatively recently at that time, because it takes a while in the Department of Education process from the kind of DeVos Trump era Department of Education. They'd issued new Title IX regulations. So we had to work through those and have been living, and our policies reflect them and the procedures. We knew that the Biden administration was likely to change those in a number of ways. But as I said, it now takes many years, to go through the formal rulemaking process at the federal level. So they have only recently kind of issued these updated the updated policies and procedures and guidance. And so really districts all over the country and states all over the country are grappling with, kind of the implementation expectations. So I think part of and so Drummond and MSMA haven't even actually established model policies yet. We're helping to move the needle on this, I think, through Tyler's work and our kind of attention to these. We did the staff harassment and discrimination policy earlier this year. Last time Tyler was with us, I guess that's about like January maybe. So what we're proposing is to kind of take a little bit of a two-step approach. There's a federal expectation of policy adoption by August 1st. So to meet that deadline, we wanted to offer, Tyler's worked with our Drummond counterparts on these, to put the policy revisions in front of you and move those through with the board, while over the summer updating and working on the procedure, because again, that's not finalized, and we would bring back, sometime in August, likely just not necessarily for approval. Procedures, nominally don't have to be approved in large part. It's really the policy, and given that we expect this to be kind of closely hew to the kind of federal expectations, and some of this conversation may not need to be a full business agenda item, but once we have the changes, we can contemplate that. But so we're putting the policies forward tonight for discussion, and there's actually some input we'd like to gather from this group to kind of consider for those revisions. So when we get there, I'll let Tyler kind of facilitate that aspect of the conversation, and you see that in some of the comments in the policy and elsewhere. So we do want to kind of move the specific policy pieces forward while gathering some input to inform some of the procedure updates, that we bring back to inform folks around in the fall when the board, kind of reconvenes and so forth. So that's a little bit of our approach here this evening. So we'll start with the student one, and then we'll go to the staff the staff policy afterwards. Anything, Tyler, you want to say before I just kind of do a quick rundown of the content in the slides?
Nope, that's great context. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. All right. So just so you can see it while I'm saying it as well. So when we think about the student harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment policy, as I said, we had major revisions in 2020. One of the areas of focus were on strengthening reporting pathways to help students know how they can report issues, and clarifying kind of our obligation to respond promptly and equitably to reports. So now there are new Title IX regulations effective on August 1st, 2024 that expand the scope of Title IX jurisdiction and kind of raise the standard for training and response. So in the policy, we've revised and kind of clarified some of the definitions to kind of be in alignment. What you'll see in that is we had this kind of concentric circle graphic that we had established in 2020 because the prior federal regulations had narrowed the scope of Title IX, and so we had to comply with that, but then saw that the Maine human rights law had a bit of an expanded scope, and then had articulated an even broader one that at the time the board felt that this was conduct that was inappropriate, and so we had used that to kind of define all of the different kind of definitions. And so some of that now has the opportunity for cleanup in that the Title IX kind of regulations and definitions more closely hew to kind of the state level expectations. So there's at a few levels that Tyler can speak to here in a bit, makes it clearer for us in terms of implementation and kind of which procedures we might use. So that's what you see in terms of some of the policy updates. Tyler, I think maybe even better if you want to speak to just at a high level some of what we'll kind of look for updates on, and then maybe we can kind of scroll through the policy specifically to see where that where that comes up. But do you want to talk about these decision points for the procedure?
Yes. So one of the significant changes under the new Title IX regulations is that in K through 12, we have for the first time the opportunity to designate some employees as confidential employees. What this would mean is that if something was reported to them that would potentially fall under Title IX, that they would not be obligated to tell the Title IX coordinator. Instead, they would be obligated to give information to the student to say, this could fall under Title IX. You would have certain rights under that. Here's the contact information for that person. Here are the options that are available to you. This is not something that we have to do. So I have suggested, it's just one part in the policy language, an amendment that would say, when we're talking about employees' responsibility to report any potential harassment or discrimination, adding the caveat with the exception of, let's see, it's a little further down. So the board, when you all established this policy a few years ago, it's still a bit further down in the reporting. Next page. There we go. So you all established a very strong and clear policy that all employees are expected to report possible incidents of harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment. We would not have to amend that at all. So this is your decision, and this isn't even a procedural one. I mean, this can be a matter of policy. So if you are not interested in enabling that opportunity, then I would suggest deleting what I've added there. What I've suggested would allow us the flexibility to consider, for instance, would we want high school social workers to be able to have confidential student conversations with students about, sexual harassment? This would not change reporting obligations under the law. So everyone is still a mandated reporter in terms of child abuse or neglect. But a student, high school student, shares with the social worker, I think I experienced what, might be sexual assault. I just want to process this. Do we want to give the opportunity for a social worker to have that conversation confidentially? Or do we want to expect that they would report that conversation to the Title IX coordinator, and then I would follow up and still see what the student wanted to do? So that's the first major decision point. And if you do approve what is suggested here, then in the procedure document, we would spell out a procedure for how we would designate such confidential employees. So that's not something that people could just claim for themselves. We would, I would have conversations with, relevant administrators who are thinking about counseling and social work, and would help give their expertise around thinking through whether or not this might be appropriate. I've had some initial conversations, and the feeling right now is that we might just want to designate high school social workers, but I'd like to open up that conversation to you all first to consider, do you even want to allow this opportunity?
So let's take this conversation up for a little bit. Go ahead, Member Opperman.
Thank you. Tyler, is there a feeling, and sometimes this is the case with students, that if they had at least initial conversations that they knew things weren't going to be running to the powers that be, that they would be more likely to open up? Is there any evidence of that kind of a situation out there in the world?
Yeah. This already happens somewhat frequently, that I will get a call and somebody will sort of speak vaguely and say, here's something a student reported to me. They're worried about what might happen. I think really there's this fear that we get a report and we'll automatically act on that. And it's our practice always to follow up and ask, what's the student want? So usually that involves a follow-up conversation about what the options are. And that's how things work ideally. And that would still, I think, be the case under a scenario where, for instance, a social worker has that conversation and the student doesn't have to fear that it will be immediately reported. But there will be the very clear expectation that the social worker number one, lets the student know. I mean, that's the Title IX mandate. If we have any confidential employees, they are obligated to share the Title IX coordinator's information. And I think in practice, it would still end up kind of in the way things are happening right now, where a social worker will say, I talked with this student, they're worried about this, and I'll say, all right, let's talk about that. And that usually generates follow-up conversation. The anxiety is almost always like, I'm afraid if I report this, you're going to do something immediately. so I'm always saying, no, we'll talk about it. We'll follow your lead.
Well, I mean, and my concern is that the confidential informant, whatever we call, would be someone who's highly trained in dealing with that kind of situation, because, otherwise it should be reported. But that was just my input to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mickey.
Thank you, Taylor. I just need a little clarification here. So, I mean, when I look at a policy for years, I tried all the time to see how comfortable students are with that person, and also the way they feel like, they feel more secure to speak out to that person. So, I mean, if we just open up the space just for social worker, because actually that's the role they may have as a, to give advice and to guide. So that mean, I feel like, let me just rephrase that. If the second paragraph, like, order are strongly encouraged to report as well, included other aspect of the staff except the social worker, I'll be okay with that amendment right there. I just want to see if orders are also included people beside of the social workers or just the people outside of the school district.
Yeah, so we can only obligate our own employees to report, and under Title IX, that is the expectation, that we have a policy that would require all of our employees who haven't been designated as confidential to make these required reports. So that aligns with the policy that we already have. And we do try to give information to students about confidential resources outside of school. Counseling resources and support. But let's say, that second paragraph speaks to the ways that, like, somebody who's not an employee, we can't do anything to make them report. So that's why we say we strongly encourage people to report, to have that conversation. But
okay,
we cannot.
Yeah, but those orders can be just people from outside the school district, right?
Yeah.
That's what I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
But the first one we have are really the specific ones. That one can be more clarified on the procedure. But here, because I see I feel like in the amendment something missing like a such as, and maybe social worker, or we are not limited to that aspect of the high trained people, and the way students feel comfortable, to come to that person, because it's not only social worker, then, students are comfortable to go and speak.
Got it. Yeah.
An issue. So I just want to have some clarity and understanding how open we have a space for students to feel more comfortable and secure.
Got it. I understand. Yeah, so that's why I'm suggesting that in policy we just have this phrase that enables us to create a procedure that can be adaptable. So in what I'm imagining for the procedure, I'm imagining a yearly review, that the Title IX coordinator going into a year would have conversations with, for instance, the director of clinical supports, and just say, like, let's talk about what we're seeing, what's happening, who might be appropriate people to designate as confidential employees. And probably the best way that will work is to designate particular categories of people. So whether that be social workers and counselors, just social workers, whether that's middle school and high school, just high school. So my preference would be to leave it a bit open-ended so that if we're seeing like it's not working to do it like this,
okay. Yeah.
that we can revisit that and say, actually, we need more confidential employees at a school, and then we would have a procedure for identifying who those people would be and then giving notice. So sending out, advertising that essentially, putting that out through our district communications, and also it would be on the webpage too of student support. Like, these are the people who have been designated as confidential employees.
Oh, okay.
And I would seek student feedback. So I think this is a good point to try to hear from students. Like, do you feel like there's somebody that you can talk to? And if students are saying like, no, then we need to figure that out.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Tyler. I really like this addition because I think something you said earlier about students not necessarily feeling confident or safe to talk to a guidance counselor about it. And like, obviously, like there's certain schools that have like DC or homeroom, which is like which could indicate that they know those students more, or they have more capacity to be able to talk to those students and like really like give that safe space for a student to feel safe enough to then like open up. I think it's an important thing to say any employee, or not any, well, yeah, any employee, because a student themselves is who's going to decide who they feel safe around, right? And if you give them a range of people to go to and feel like if you come to this person, they would be able to take action on what you're coming to them for. And it's not just going to be like, you're just telling them and then they're going to bring you to another table to tell somebody else what you just told them, if that makes sense. Like, just that like stretch of like, okay, now we're going to go to this person, you're going to sit down, and then you're going to retell us what we just went to. And then now you're going to go to another table and sit down, and we're going to and so I think it's really important just to say that like all adults in the building have the capacity to like be a confidential person that students can rely on. I don't know if that's what it's saying. I mean, I think that's what it's saying. Like most employees in the building could be designated.
I mean, I just let me interject for a quick sec. And maybe this suggests that the proposed language here, if the board wants to leave open the option of having confidential employees designated, that we may want to change the language here, because if you did not read this portion, I don't know if people can see my highlights, and says all school employees are required to report possible incidents of harassment and discrimination, right? That has been the working expectation, is the working expectation now. Their staff get, an orientation to what they need to do, if somebody comes to them reporting that, or if they witness something, so that they know where to go with that information and how to support, to your point. But we're not proposing, and I don't think would find it, appropriate, that all staff are considered confidential employees. That would, I think, students should 100%. Agree with you 100%, Nyla, that it was like this, the policy language supported, like that students can go to anybody they feel comfortable with. Right. That's not the decision they need to be making. Right. It's like they should, access the adult that they have a relationship with. And then the adult has the responsibility, being in a school, to know what to do to properly kind of like support the student with that information. And it may mean that the adult needs to go get more information to be able to support them. But I think if everybody in the district was designated a confidential employee, as it's meant within this Title IX policy language, it means effectively nobody would have any obligation to report to the district when there is an incident of sexual harassment or sexual assault. And I think
sorry, I was misrepresenting the difference, I guess, between like the reporting versus just you can go to an adult and confidently tell them something, and then they would need to then they would be able to do the work to get like to go to the Title IX officer to either do a report or carry out. But maybe I think that might need more clarification on the policy itself, that anybody can, like students can come to any student with with anything that they feel like they need to speak about, but that, or maybe, never mind, maybe just scrap what I said and maybe I just read that line wrong. But I don't know if others have the same, thing. Or anyways, I'm gonna go past that part and go to my other question. Could you scroll up to the discrimination part?
Yeah.
I just was wondering if we can tweak the definition, and instead of treating individuals differently, I'm wondering if we can go along the lines of like unequal treatment of specific members. So instead of like differently doesn't necessarily specify like unequal, if that makes sense, because anybody can be treated differently, whereas like unequal is very specific to like
it's
like the unequal treatment of a group of people or of
So I will say, I think that's what's assumed. It's kind of an unwieldy sentence because it's got like a clause in the middle, but it's the piece of treating individuals differently because of their membership in a protected category that assumes, I guess, unequal treatment. I don't know if this helps, but this is part of the reason actually why I want to add the second sentence. And that's because it specifies more that the point is we are paying attention for when there's an unequal impact, which I use the language of disparately there, that the treatment's not only different, but the impact of that treatment differently affects people because of their status in a protected category. So I don't know if that helps to clarify your question or answer, or like,
I think I think differently to me doesn't specify the importance, whereas unequal does, if that makes sense, because I think like the concept of unequal treatment speaks to equality, not just like there's a difference in treatment. But when you say it's unequal, it speaks to the concept of there is an equal and the treatment is unequal. I don't know. I guess it could be semantics, but I just don't.
I know it.
The word differently just doesn't really speak to the gravity. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. Did you want to weigh in on that? No. I was thinking as well. We're super in the fine grain on this, but I think the comma is confusing there. Because it's like this, it should read, I think, we need to actually get rid of the comma and the or, because it's treating individuals differently, interfering with, or preventing them from enjoying the advantages or privileges afforded to others, right? That's the real, substance of it. And the way the comma sits there, I agree, the differently kind of pops in a different way. Pops to kind of call it out, I think, in how we were looking at it. I mean, and I think we would want to double check as well whether there is some legal definition aspect of it too, to make sure we're not fiddling with it. But I do think the comma in that or is confusing here, because it's actually, that's kind of like a series there. It's if you treat them differently or interfere with or prevent them from enjoying those things. So.
Thank you, Aaron. That sounds good to me.
Yeah. I love, Nyla, what you're getting at there. In a way, I think if it feels better to you to change that. I've also always felt weird about the comma, so I think maybe I'd like to run it by someone at Drummond just to make sure we don't make some sort of unintentional change. But treating individuals differently, even though that like what you're getting at in terms of like highlighting the unequal treatment. Actually, treating individuals differently is pretty broad, so we can do a lot of work with that. So I do like that word there, and maybe getting rid of the or, and then adding another comma after interfering with sort of underscores what you're getting at, I hope.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Chair Lentz?
I'm going to switch us back to confidential employee, if that's okay. Tyler, I'm hoping maybe you can help me understand the origin of this potential change. It's unclear to me what the benefit would be or why this is now a category of employee that we could have. Can you help me understand how it came about?
So I'm not 100% certain of this. It's more sort of reading between the lines. But when the Title IX regulations were done in 2020, they were really written with higher ed in mind. And then there were just like a few places where it was like, and K through 12 this. And one of those places was that in higher ed, it's, specified this ability to have confidential employees. Also, there were a lot of sort of loopholes that like basically a limited number of people were sort of mandated reporters. And so I think it was a pretty, well, I don't know, ill-considered might be a strong way of saying that, but I just don't think that was fully fleshed out. I think they were like, yeah, K through 12, we don't want people, we actually want people to report. So we're just going to say, all people in K through 12 are required to report. And I think then when the Biden administration was working on this, they solicited more feedback from Title IX groups and sort of survivor organizations. And there was feedback that sort of blanket restriction of having confidential employees in K through 12 might be too limiting. And so it might be valuable, because K through 12 districts often have someone like a social worker who has sort of by law and their ethical trainings, certain provisions around confidentiality. I think there was a sort of willingness to say like, yeah, there might be districts that would want to enable a social worker to include that sort of confidential aspect of their work in relationship to Title IX as well. So that's as much as I can get of like why this shift.
Yeah. I guess and this comes also from, my experience of working in schools and being a mandated reporter. It feels like it could be confusing in some ways, or, and like if this is leading us towards a best practice that is going to be good for kids and good for our employees, then by all means, like I would want to support it. But I think I don't understand fully yet what it's seeking to solve or make better within what we're doing right now, if that makes sense. And I guess I'm thinking, like if high school social workers are confidential employees, like, is that then marketed to our students so that they know that these are those people? And like, how do they know the different, like, how would a student know the difference between what they can tell that person versus another person? And then I guess, in my experience with students who told me reportable things, like they don't really understand the reporting process totally, right? And so I guess I'm worried that having somebody as a confidential employee without students being totally aware of what is confidential and what is not could put a student in a situation where they're saying something that they think is confidential but isn't. Like, I guess it feels muddier to me. And so I guess I don't know if what I'm saying is respondable to, or if there's any clarity that could be provided. And I'm curious how other folks are feeling about this, but I feel still like it's a little muddy to me.
Yeah, the only response I will give, and then I'm curious to hear from others too, is that that's definitely a concern I share, that it will sort of heighten our need to as we are teaching students about the resources that are available to them to help them understand these distinctions. And that's why in initial conversations that I've had, there was a thinking of maybe just limiting this to high school. And honestly, so like, this is the one thing that I don't have a strong feeling about. Like everything else I've suggested, like obviously I would, take your word under advisement and like follow whatever you all decide. But like, this is one piece where I'm like, I could go either way. I could make an argument in either direction, and I will feel comfortable with whatever this policy says at the end. What I've offered is an option that would enable us to create a procedure for designating confidential employees if that seems appropriate, where we also wouldn't have to. But I would be comfortable if you all said like, no, we don't want to give that option.
So just a follow-up response to that. And I so appreciate your sharing your opinion, because I guess I'm wondering in terms of like implementation and use, like, would you rather spend your energy trying to teach a newer policy or continuing to just like reinforce what we already do so that we have better implementation and behaviors, I guess?
That's a great question.
And also, you don't have to answer right now in this moment. I just like, that's a lens that I'm trying to bring to decisions about what we're doing. Like, do we just continue with what we're already doing, or do we want to make changes and have to kind of like re-up on those?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't think these distinctions are necessarily meaningful to students as it is. And so I think that could be confusing to start introducing a new category, but also like, I think some students do have the expectation that that there are people that they can talk to who wouldn't, report. So
a couple of thoughts, I think, related, and Member Opperman, I see your hand there. I think, there has been, since the implementation and the expectation of the mandated reporting, right, we went through a few issues with a lack of reporting, because even not from the student, I think students generally assume social workers are confidential, because they are in most respects, in a lot of ways, in terms of their, the conversations they may be having, particularly at the high school level. But when there weren't confidential employees designated, we worked through some process, got legal counsel, right, around social workers' duty to report when it met, the criteria of Title IX, and as well even actually to mandated reporting in some cases. So we went through a whole process. So there's a culture there that already exists, that I think is similar to what Tyler's saying, which is there's an assumption of confidentiality, particularly when speaking to social workers at the high school level. So how much this would kind of go over their heads. I think I wanted to just offer, I appreciate your kind of consideration of what some of the potential challenges might be. And I just wanted to name a couple others for the committee's consideration, which is this then potentially closes, and correct me if I'm off base, Tyler, but all of the avenues of data and reporting to us, right, as a system about what's going on. So there might be instances of sexual harassment that are disclosed to a confidential employee that we never hear about, right? And so I think that's one of the drawbacks where we've been trying to build a culture around reporting and around clarity around data, that this has the potential, not necessarily, but has the potential to kind of limit our knowledge of exactly what's going on for students. And that also cuts both ways. Our most challenging, tricky situations, or many of them, have involved high school students alleging, divulging very, concerning interactions with other students, and it being very difficult about what they want to report and what, it's very fraught, as you can imagine. And so, I think the question is, are they better served when they have a little bit more confidential space to kind of explore that, or are they better served by the system having the trauma-informed ways that kind of Tyler spoke about us, kind of like holding some monitoring of the employees receiving reports, right, and our support of them to be able to provide effective guidance to the students, right? And I don't know that there's an answer around that, but I think those are some of the things that I've, come up for me in weighing this consideration. Member Opperman, did you have input on this point? Yep.
Just thinking back on my experiences, there are times when a student, first of all, Nilette's correct, Chair Beaulieu is correct that students should be able to go to anybody. And I think that's the whole push to belonging that we are trying to get in the district. Mm-hmm. So that if a student starts to go to a teacher or a coach or something like that, or is uncomfortable with something and isn't necessarily expressing it, or maybe they do, but to a degree, but the teacher, coach, or whatever could direct them, of course, and say, if you don't want to tell me the story, this person will listen and hear without you're immediately jumping to report something, because I do have to report, which I've had to do before. So it just may be a way of getting to the next level of a conversation that a student needs to have. So in that respect, but then when they go to have that conversation, that they have that level of confidentiality. I understand what you're saying, though, Superintendent Townsend, that though you can run into a sticky wicket with this if there's a really severe situation. But I think we're running into situations where there are, what is reported, what is confidentiality. There are things that are maybe not discriminatory, but that are personally fraught for an individual, that they don't want to share it to a place that it must be reported. And I guess, in case of, I don't know, my question on this would be, is if a parent wanted to, said, XYZ about my child, would a confidential person, a confidential employee, have to report that to the parent? So, I mean, there's a whole sticky situation going there. I do agree, though, really honing in on the fact that somebody has to report at some level to somebody is critically important. I've just seen situations where kids shut down too fast, and I would like to know that they could get that next step and feel a little bit higher level of confidence in that they can express themselves. And then my presumption on a confidential employee was to talk it through and then help at the next step in the reporting. I mean, that would have to be the understanding of a confidential employee. I would make it very limited. But again, so I don't have a problem putting this phrase in here. Whether we go forward with who is that person is something else. But sometimes I think you need that extra level for students to have care and safety, a safe feeling. It used to be you put a sticker on your door and said, this is a safe space. So, that kind of thing. All right. I think that's my 2 cents, and that's enough of a 2 cents.
And that does, Member Opperman, like the decision point tonight is just to include the language that would make it possible, right? What Tyler has said we would bring back for discussion. And I think even as we're having this, it's clear that it'll need to be brought back, right? Is deliberation of like the kind of scope, the numbers, the process, right? All of the procedure elements that'll be in ACAA-R about how we might actually kind of operationalize this. So tonight's decision point is just whether we want to leave open the possibility of designating confidential employees, right? And the how that gets designated, who, for what period, and some of the other terms associated with it, right? Will be what comes back in the procedure around that section. So I know that was only one of 3 items, Tyler, that we wanted to speak to. So, I mean, I'm thinking maybe let's talk about the others, and then we'll kind of circle back, give people a moment to kind of consider that discussion. Let's talk about the 2 other issues, and then we can kind of come back for final discussion.
Yeah. So these won't be decision points for tonight, in the sense that they don't go into the policy. But one of the things that's possible under the new Title IX regulations is the potential just to have one procedure for addressing all complaints related to harassment and discrimination. So the way things stand right now is that we have a procedure for most things, and then if something meets the very specific definition of sexual harassment under Title IX, under these current regulations, then we have a separate procedure to go through that complaint process, because it's just far more onerous. And so, the decision was made a few years ago to have separate processes that only for those things that met this very highly specific definition of sexual harassment under Title IX would we use this other process. Otherwise, we'd have one. So as I was discussing this with Melissa Huey from Drummond Woodsum, she just asked the question, do you actually want to have one procedure, or do you want to have one procedure for all protected categories and then a separate one for Title IX? And the reason she asked that is that for the most part, the procedures under the new Title IX regulations really align quite well with what we already have in ACAA-R. So that speaks to the really good work that was already done to create that procedure. But there are some additional points. The main one she raised was that Title IX requires that we start a complaint process with the presumption that the person, that the respondent, the person accused of potentially violating policy, is innocent. And she said, we don't have to do that for other complaints. So there you're already starting from a place of like needing to meet a certain threshold. I still am inclined to go down to one procedure. I think it will be more sensible for all of us. I think it will be easier to train. It will be easier to manage. But that sort of presumption of innocence is one example. Another is that there are particular requirements around like what is included in a notice. When you get a complaint, you have to make sure the complaint includes this notice to people, and that's a matter of due process. And so it does sort of heighten the obligations for which like we then become liable for meeting those obligations. So like it could be a consideration of like Title IX does set in some ways a higher bar for due process. And so therefore we do want to separate that procedure out. I want to just pose that conversation because that really will shape how we proceed in the summer. This is one area where I am inclined to suggest I do think it will make more sense to have one procedure for all protected categories. But I don't know. I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in too. Melissa was just actually posing questions. At first I thought, wait a minute, I thought we all operated on the assumption this will be better to go down to one. So she raised these questions that I wanted to raise for you. I don't think they're insurmountable, but there are particular sort of due process requirements that come into play under Title IX. Yeah, Member Opperman.
Yeah, I think presumption of innocence is critically important in any situation. Just because it's not to say that the person is innocent and not to say there shouldn't be an investigation and all, but I think just the issue can be blown out and not blown out of proportion. If there's a real situation, there's a real situation. But if it's something that people say, well, you know, if I say X, it'll happen, as opposed to saying I don't have to prove it or I don't have to explain enough so that somebody else can prove it. That's a tough one, but I do think innocence is an important piece in our judicial system, and we aren't judges. I guess that's my piece.
Yep. Makes sense to me.
Any other, I mean, I think the tension, I think just to call it out is, you know, that informed our revisions, you know, and was, I mean, one of my deep kind of takeaways, right, from the work to do the other was like beginning each engagement with a student who's coming forward, you know, because the act of coming forward to reporting means the student has gone through, you know, significant amount to even make that decision, much less what they actually experienced. And so, you know, part of the trauma-informed lens was like that we believe the reporters. And I think there is a distinction to be made between having the reporting party understand and know we believe them, right? And through a process, you know, a formal investigatory process, determining actual kind of culpability for the respondents. So I do think there is some space to kind of land where Tyler's suggesting, but just I think that's the real tension that it raises is we start with this presumption that informed kind of our current procedure of we believe the reporting party, right? And we go from there. So that's just what's getting called out here.
Yeah.
Any other committee or board chairlets, any thoughts on initially? This is one that doesn't impact our decision making on the policy tonight, but just as an opportunity to get some input as we work on a proposed procedure.
I think I would be inclined to support Tyler's suggestion of just having one process. I think anywhere we can streamline so it's easier to educate and implement, we should do that, as long as we're not, you know, compromising on quality and outcomes.
Yeah. I appreciate the chance just to put that before you, because I've been operating the assumption we will proceed working toward one procedure. So I wouldn't want to come back in August and for you all to say like, wait a minute, we don't want that. So this is helpful. And it's also helpful to keep in mind how we still center that trauma-informed lens, which really is an important part of that intake process. You know, the first way that students are supported when they're reporting something, I do think we operate from a place of saying, like, we believe you and we want to support you to make sure that you get the support you need.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you hit on that last one there, and then we can kind of close, you know, kind of come back to ACAA overall.
Yeah, this is one other place that that connects with matters of fair process. So right now, just to sort of refresh you, under ACAA-R, what happens is that we get a complaint. And so this too, I just want to distinguish a report from a complaint. So a complaint, somebody's already reported their concern and they've said, like, I want there to be an investigation with potential consequences. So every time a report is made is not necessarily a complaint. But once a student or family says, we want to make a complaint, which means we want an investigation with a decision about responsibility for whether policy was violated. The policy says, or the procedure says that I will inform the superintendent and that we will then designate together an investigator. And then that investigator comes up with findings, and I then return to, the policy says the superintendent or designee. In our practice, we have been designating another decision maker. So it's usually been Dr. Ahmed or Dr. Ekin-Sindwina, depending on whether it's elementary or secondary. And then that reserves the superintendent to be an appeal decision maker. So that's the way the procedure is already designed. And there are real benefits to that, to having differentiation of roles that can lead to more sort of oversight that can hopefully at its best lead to fairer processes. So the old Title IX regulations required that differentiation, and they said that the Title IX coordinator, so me currently, could be an investigator, but not the decision maker. The new regulations allow that we could have one person who investigates and decides, and that person can be the Title IX coordinator. So it does give us the flexibility to have a fairly, more efficient process. And in some ways, I go back and forth about this because I do think it's good in terms of fair process to have differentiation. I also I am the person who knows the most about all of these things. And so often, the recommendations that I'm giving inform the decision. But separate from me, where I actually see this playing out more often is more things are going to fall under Title IX, which is to say it's a broader definition. So there are more reports that we're going to have to say, yes, if a student wants to make a complaint, this will fall under Title IX. And so we're going to have the obligation to follow through with a procedure that fits the Title IX expectations. Because there will be more, and because the broader umbrella means that not everything will be, the most egregious. I don't like to differentiate more or less serious complaints, but some complaints are more complex, deal with things that may be crimes. So sexual assault, as opposed to harassment, which is not less serious, but a little more straightforward in how it's processed. There will be more things that we will be able to say to, an assistant principal, for instance, you're the closest to this, you know the situation well, go ahead and investigate and decide. If I'm being honest, we are getting better at this, and I have a lot of confidence in all of our school leaders. So this is not to speak to any sort of worries about any individuals or any of the ways that things are happening now. But in practice, that does happen fairly frequently because principals, assistant principals are used to hearing complaints of bullying. They investigate, they make a decision, they move forward from there. It is a little, we're still sort of learning the rhythms of, if it's harassment or discrimination based on a protected category, you need to pull that out. You don't get to just investigate and decide. So the question really becomes whether or not we want to enable the flexibility to write a procedure in such a way that that we could, from the start, say, let's have an investigation, the investigator and decision maker be the same person. So just if you were to think that would be okay, maybe, we want to see the procedure, but we might be okay with that. The way I'm imagining writing that is that when a complaint comes, at a school, and it's going to meet the harassment or discrimination, one of these definitions, that there needs to be a consultation with me, and I would, in consultation with that school leader and, with appropriate district administrators, would then designate up front, yes, go ahead and investigate and decide, and then would be available for consultation. So the hope is to get better at doing that up front when something comes and it is a complaint, to say, let's have that check-in and let's decide who should investigate and decide. So I'm inclined to give us maybe that flexibility to have an option of a single investigator and decision maker, because that does mirror other processes at the school level, like bullying, where also there would be the opportunity to say no, this is this is going to involve special ed category, like we need to consider IEPs, we need to consider legal issues, we need to then I would say, I want to manage that, or, I'd appoint, or we might seek an outside investigator. So I'd just like your feedback on how you feel about the possibility of using a single investigator and decision maker. And the one thing I would say too is that we would maintain the right to appeal. So it's not truly a single investigator model, in that would be when one person does every single thing and there's no right to appeal. So we would still have that check that somebody feels the process was unfair, they can appeal. All right, that's all I'll say on that.
Member Opperman?
I understand your reasoning, particularly on the idea of bullying and things but the human nature would at times suggest that if a principal is overwhelmed by one individual being a complainer or whatever, there's a personality situation. And I'm not saying that people would do this quickly, but it's a subtle piece. And I would just want to make sure we were very careful. And we haven't even started talking about with faculty and staff, but that, that parent always is there kind of thing, those issues that are just, maybe they're true, but maybe it's, this is now something we need a little distance for. So I don't know how you want to write that up, or how you want to, like you're saying, there is appeal process, but those are concerns I would have in any kind of report, investigate situation. Sometimes having an investigator in the building reads between the lines in the right way too, as opposed to being too distant. So I mean, I'm waffling. I'm sorry, I'm waffling, but I just you understand. I mean, it's I've just seen it happen. Oh, that kid, the vice principal or whatever. In my experience, so just a concern both ways on that, and I don't know exactly what to do about it, but you're the expert, Tyler.
Well, I mean, this is why I'm bringing it to you, to just get this sort of feedback and think through these kinds of concerns, because I too could go in either direction. I do think whether or not we want to differentiate the roles, I do think we need to grant ourselves a little more flexibility. The way the procedure is currently written, there's so many decision points that are the superintendent's that they don't necessarily make sense. I think, and because we reserve the right to appeal, that decision to be the superintendent's, that should really be a separate thing. So it could be that we're providing ourselves some flexibility to have, school level investigator, and then, if they're investigating, I decide, and, or if I'm investigating, Dr. Ahmed decide. We could figure out some different arrangements. Yeah. Member Bondo.
Yes, thank you, Tam. And I think I'm really in favor, like you just mentioned, about the flexibility, because it just depends on the value and seriously, each of the different levels they will take into consideration about the complaint. And I think coming to the process where you coming to you, and then you can, have those school leaders or the I just don't know what the process will be, but I think that flexibility line will be much more, access to the best practice, how the investigation should go, instead just, to have specific people to do it. I think moving around and see how serious and how the issue is about, and, making the process a little more flexible for the investigation to go, and we know the layers of the people who are playing the roles, and then we have a clear follow-up on those each different areas, so we know exactly the process, and we can stream also the outcomes after coming out of the investigation and also the outcomes of that. So I feel like the flexibility is just something much better for the process. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And that will be my hope, is to ensure like fair process, due process with flexibility that we can make this work well. Yeah, Member Bill.
So can you clarify to me if the approach right now is the single investigator decision making?
No. So under Title IX, we're not allowed to do that for Title IX complaints, but also the way that ACAA-R was written a couple of years ago, it is not. So the current procedure is we have an investigator, and then the student equity officer, my role, I take the investigator's findings. I mean, sometimes I am the investigator, and then I consult with, the procedure says the superintendent or designee. More often in practice, we're using a designee and reserving the superintendent for the appeal decision.
Okay, and that this flexibility would basically continue that?
So I guess that will be a decision point that we will make, is we could either continue that. I would probably want to rewrite the decision maker piece to be broader. I don't know. That's something.
I'm just trying to understand if the flexibility would be different from what we're already doing.
It would, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it would expand the flexibility such that at the point of complaints made, a decision could be made, right, or the procedure could be written such that it did allow for a single investigator and decision maker, or those roles could be differentiated in different ways by different people, just to kind of remember Bondo's notion, and what Tyler was sharing, just that, it may be appropriate for an assistant principal to be the investigator on one case, but Tyler in another, and we would want a separate decision maker because, the behaviors are so significant or are repeated, and it's needing, different set of eyes. So I think the procedure could be written such that it allowed for even increased flexibility in terms of assigning those roles, and it would allow for one person to be assigned to be both roles in some cases.
Oh, okay. I think that's where there was a confusion for me. I was thinking that you guys were we were talking about it just being like multiple folks and not being a single person, whereas we're just talking about the flexibility of both approaches being able to be used.
Yeah, right now, they do need to be different people, but just a consideration, do we want to give the flexibility that they could, under some circumstances, be one person?
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
I missed that.
No,
okay.
I'm glad you asked, because it's I'm really in the weeds in this, so like getting where it's just like, yeah.
I was like, oh, we're gonna add more people, so there's more people to investigate. That's where I was going towards.
Oh yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Timothy, go ahead.
Tyler, if the same person is the investigator and decision maker, is it also possible that that person could be the one that receives an appeal? Or could a policy be written or a line be written that says that if we're in a situation where one person is the investigator and decision maker, that person obviously cannot also receive an appeal on that situation?
Yeah, the appeal decision maker will have to be different.
Okay.
And that's something that actually the new Title IX regulations do not require that we allow appeal, which that's the only big surprise to me about the new regulations. I mean, we already do, and we will. I think that's an important part of fair process. And the way it's written is the superintendent decides appeals, and that's consistent with other procedures too. So I imagine that will continue to be the case.
Chair Lentz?
Just wanted to also echo, Tyler, what you said about building the muscle around if it's a protected class, then it gets flagged immediately. So just hoping that you can build that into the procedure as our building leaders are getting better at recognizing what goes where. So just thank you for acknowledging that, and excited to have that built in.
Yeah, thanks. Honestly, that's the thing I've been most excited about with the regulations is we are going to need to do a pretty robust round of training. And I think we've had some good practice under the policy that we have, and we're getting better. And I think this will be an opportunity to really strengthen that.
So let me see, I'm just mindful of time a little bit. Are there others? So we've got, these last two pieces have just been input. They aren't necessarily related to decisions about the revisions to the policy. Now that's going to be stuff that'll come back in the procedure. It's seeming abundantly clear out of this conversation that we will calendar and bring back the procedure for discussion after all this. But that'll happen later in August or but just in respect to the policy, does anybody have any further questions about the policy in terms of proposed language changes there?
I just want to mention the friendly amendment that we had earlier. Okay, that's good.
Yep. So we'll confirm, but I think we'll clean up the kind of mechanics of that sentence to make it read clearer. To get the intended point across. So.
Sounds good.
Yep.
And I actually, if you're up for it, have a friendly amendment to my own. In the training section, so down just a little bit, or up a little bit now. Where it says must be trained. I think I'd prefer to change that to the active voice must complete training. That first sentence, all employees. So that language is directly from the new regulations. This is just saying what the district's obligations are to train people, but part of the purpose of including it in this policy is that what the Department of Education is going to expect is not just that we offer training, but that employees complete the training. So of course it will be incumbent on us to do that and to follow up. But as I'm now looking at it again, I think it might be better to have that in the active voice, that all employees must complete training, because then if we have an issue where like an employee has been reminded, that we can ultimately potentially have a complaint to say you've failed to comply with the policy, that you haven't completed the training. It's a very, very subtle thing, but I would prefer the active must complete training.
I agree.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Chair Lenz?
Yeah, this is a question I maybe should know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And it may be somewhere in ACAA-R that I just didn't catch, but the Speak Up website that we use, is there anything in these two policies that says that we have to have the online form? And if it is, can you just show me where that is?
Yep.
I might have just missed
some
it.
of that red right there, which actually I added just to sort of bolster that expectation. So at the point it said we would establish one, it didn't exist. And now, saying that we would maintain it. And I just wanted to connect that with our obligations under Title IX to monitor for barriers to reporting, just as a way to sort of like underscore to your point, like it's good that we have it and we have to maintain it. Like we might adapt it in various ways, but yes, that is a matter.
So the anonymous reporting process, that is the online
that is the
portal. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And like in 5 years, who knows? It may be different based on different technologies or options, but that is fulfilling that item. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions on the proposed revisions to ACAA, we have two friendly amendments in the definition section around discrimination, cleaning up kind of the commas and ors to make that kind of achieve the desired, communicate the desired intent. And then Tyler's own friendly amendment to his amendments of kind of the more active obligation around training language there in that section. So I think if there aren't others with those, we can, consider an action to move this policy forward.
Thank you, Aaron. Can I have a motion to approve policy ACAA to the full board with its friendly amendments. Thank you, Julianne. Second. Thank you, Mickey. All that approve. Thank y'all, and the policy is sent to the board.
Great. We have just one more tonight. Thank you for hanging in there. We'll go to some similar elements because this is the implications for our recently updated staff harassment and discrimination policy. So again, as we said, we just revised these recently in 2024. One of the goals of those revisions was to align it with the student harassment and discrimination and sexual harassment policy, but thus is also impacted by Title IX revisions. Here in the policy, there's some similar definitional changes that are happening, similar to how we talked about in the student context. Just as Tyler named, there are specific training obligations, but for employees, here some additional added protections pertaining to pregnancy and related conditions that are part of the requirements of the new Title IX regulations. So, Tyler, anything else you want to add here about the proposed changes to the ACAB, the staff harassment and sexual harassment policy?
No, just that I think the same amendments, the friendly amendments, the last one apply here because it's the exact same language. So I assume maybe you all might want to do the same. I do. This is sort of awkward to bring up after providing this language. So I do think we need to name pregnancy in this policy because there's no, at least that I could find, no policy that addresses pregnancy-related conditions. Under collective bargaining agreements, they do, but I think we need, the overarching framework. And what I propose is language that's directly from the Title IX regulations. As I was looking at it again today in preparation, I think there are probably ways that could be sort of simplified. I think it's a little clunky just to have language that's sort of legalese from the regulations. So I'm wondering if you might be open to the idea of if I provide a simplified form by, that we could consider with the full board, some clarified language.
Where are you referring to specifically?
The section on pregnancy. So right now that the sort of biggest chunks of additions, basically, that states all of the things that have to be true for us. So they need to be addressed by board policy somewhere. I just think some of the language could be simplified a little. The definitions remain, but the district must not discriminate. I think that could. I'm just saying it's a little clunky the way it's written.
Do you want to simplify the whole thing or just the pregnancy part?
Oh, really? The stuff under the definitions. So starting the district must not discriminate against any employee or applicant for employment on the basis of blah, 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 blah. This gives a lot of language. So I think we could just simplify it in a bullet pointed list, the district will not discriminate. We will develop policies and procedures that ensure, students, that employees have the right to leave, that employees are provided break time. Also, it actually is fine what's there. We're required to have this language.
I would appreciate any form of simplicity. I think it makes things read well, but I don't know, Aaron, how you feel, but anyways, maybe take the questions and then we can discuss after.
So long as, and I'm sure, it falls within what's required, right? It doesn't require to mean it has to be the same exact language, but it has to meet, cover those specific things. So if we can do it more efficiently, probably good. I think Member Bondo, you had your hand up, and then Member Opperman.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Tyler, because this was my question when I was reading. I think you just read my mind because it was a lot of confusion for me having the reading almost the same thing. So it was overlapping and duplicate some of those lines. And I was just putting a question here to say, can we have a simple language under the pregnancy level? So thank you for bringing up. And I think I'm in favor to have something under there who can, have a simple, because I look at some of the bilingual that we have as a staff, it's just the way we understand the broader under the line can be, keeping the concept but a little more simple language that. So that was my big question. And,
Yeah.
And thank you for raising that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Member Opperman?
Yes, suggestion is just to eliminate the paragraph that says in cases where this district does not maintain a leave policy. We have a leave policy. And I think we're required to have a family leave policy now, different. So that might be just one simple place to do it. I don't know about the bathroom break. I mean, that if that's necessary, because it's not anywhere else in our policies, but that one paragraph, that's the only other things seem okay.
And this, I will just admit, Melissa Huey from Drummond and I had a long work session where we focused on the student policies, and I left there thinking all of those things will be relevant to revising the employee policy because it's all the same stuff. But then I remembered we need this pregnancy. So that's when I thought I'll just include the language from Title IX, but I can return to Melissa and say, like, how would we simplify it? I mean, I actually already have asking for her feedback. I haven't heard back from her yet, but we can work on simplifying that.
Great. Chair Lentz?
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious if we should be putting the same language in the first paragraph on the first page as we do in the last paragraph on the first page. It just seems like the description of the categories in the first paragraph is less detailed than the last paragraph. And to me, that language should be mirrored, but I don't know if there's a reason why it's not. Sorry, the first page. You can go back to the first page, last paragraph on the first page.
I actually don't know why either. And honestly, I left that because it had just been revised in February. And so I think probably what happened there is we did a combination of what language from ACAA and Drummond gave some, and I think in the lineup it got repeated. So maybe that, maybe the solution is just revising the first paragraph in a similar way to ACAA. Actually, I think we can just copy this language, get rid of that last paragraph.
Well, yeah, I think we should be using, because the updates, because there were a few policies. I think it started with updates to the Maine human rights legislation that brought in some of the stuff about hair texture, and so I think we probably need to align it to that language. But I don't think that there's not any reason it should be consistent across both policies, so we can ensure that that's true.
Awesome. Yeah. And then, just that first paragraph and the last paragraph on that page are different. Is that okay? And then where we say breastfeeding, can we also include chest feeding within the language? Again, I'm not sure if there's a state mandate that gives us this language, but in terms of the private space to express milk.
That's a good point. Yeah, I took that directly from what's in Title IX, and so we can expand that. I think that is appropriate, and it meets what we're obligated to include. Yeah, beautiful.
And the just to double check on that space, I know it says it's like free from intrusion. As someone that has used a lactation room, which I think is probably the outdated term at this point, but like free from intrusion to me means a lockable space, but does the policy does it not have to be a lockable space? Is it written intentionally for that? And
That's
I'm not saying that you wrote it like that. I'm just saying,
Yeah, no, right.
you know what I mean? Like, I think like
Yeah.
having a lockable space feels important for security there. And I would advocate that free from intrusion could go further.
And I think what you're speaking to is the need to elaborate this further in our procedures, that like this establishes basically the baseline from Title IX, which says free from intrusion, but we can consider how we want to interpret that and sort of implement it, I suppose.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so just things that I'm hearing as it relates to ACAB, just kind of going in order there of how the policy is laid out. So the discussion we had of just ensuring consistency across, that first paragraph and last paragraph, and then similarly, I'll say with the ACAA, we're using the same sets of definitions and descriptors of protected classes across all of the policies wherever that's called out. Then there are a couple of language issues with the comma in the training note that were in ACAA that will also include an ACAB. Then look at kind of clarifying in the language for the whole pregnancy section and what we can kind of economize, so that it gets more maximum impact here. And then some language changes there in terms of the chest feeding and, clarity, it sounds like in the procedures where we'll address the lockable element for the intrusion. Okay. Any other questions or discussion about elements of the staff harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment policy? Okay. And if none others, then I think we can take a motion to, with the amendments that I just articulated, move this forward. We'll update. Yeah, we can move this forward to the full board.
Thank you, Aaron. Can I have a motion to move policy ACAB to the full board with its full amendments? Thank you, Mickey. Can I get a second? And all who approve. Thank you, and thank you, Yusra. I think we're good, Aaron.
Great. So we have a few little kind of nuts and bolts to work through over the next couple of days to get these cleaned up and ready for posting because it's a quick turnaround with a board meeting on Tuesday. So we'll make these updates to get them ready for first read and workshop on Tuesday. I think in particular as it relates to the harassment and discrimination policies, it'll be good to do a little bit more discussion and engagement at the workshops there, just so that people can be primed to engage in that conversation when they're looking at the procedure on the back end. So, and understand particularly the confidential employees element of it now. So we'll plan that out for Tuesday. So we'll do first read and workshop on Tuesday, June 4th, and then presuming all goes well, any changes we could consider prior to second read and vote on the 18th. So that's the trajectory for this set of policies. We have one last policy and committee, curriculum committee meeting before the July recess. So that's on June, sorry. What's our date?
June 25th.
June 25th. All right, June 25th. And our topics there are kind of a set of board related policies. So we'll work on getting those drafts out to you here in the coming weeks for review ahead of that meeting. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler, for all of your time and expertise tonight. It was super helpful.
Yeah, thank you too. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to reflect with you all.
Yeah, I really appreciate the explanations. They were really helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Good questions.
Trying. We're all learning here. Does anybody have anything else they would like to say? No? Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. It is May 28th, Tuesday, It is Tuesday, May 28th wow, I was gonna say the time here. It's about to be 1 here, but 7:58 p.m. Wow. Okay. I completely messed it up. Okay. I don't
can ask for a motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you.
Can we adjourn, please?
Language is like
I know.
killing me.
It's okay. Motion to adjourn and then get a second, and then you can raise your hands, and then you just say the time, and it will be 7:59.
Okay, I think where I messed up is the policy. Like, this is the policy and committee. Okay, I'll do that after. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. Mickey, I'm calling you to second it.
You will second it.
All in favor? Perfect. All right.
Good night, all.
Adjourn.
Good morning to you, Nellette.
Literally. The Policy and Curriculum Committee has adjourned on Tuesday, May 28th at 7:59 p.m. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye.
And Erin, thank you so much. Have a good day.